History is full of turning points, but what if the stories we know are only half the truth? Rome didn't fall the way you think. Columbus didn't really discover what they told you. And revolutions not always sparked for freedom. In this episode, we dig deep into 10 moments that shaped our world but happened nothing like you were taught. This is the side of history they don't want you to know. In the year 476 AD, Rome fell. But the truth is far more complex than a single invasion or decisive battle. The Roman Empire had been eroding from within for centuries before the last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was overthrown by the Germanic leader Odoacer. Rome, once the heart of an unconquerable civilization, was drowning in a swamp of corruption, civil wars, economic inflation, and political division. The elites were consumed with personal interests, while the army grew increasingly reliant on foreign mercenaries who had no real loyalty to the empire. Rome's fall was not a single moment. It was a long, drawn-out series of catastrophes. From the Visigoths' sack of Rome in 410 AD under Alaric, to outbreaks of plague and economic collapse, the empire was like a massive body being torn apart piece by piece. In the midst of the collapse, Rome no longer terrified the world. The sound of Roman soldiers no longer struck fear, and cities fell one after another. There were no saviors left. No miracles to wait for. Even the strongest empires can fall, not only from enemies at the gate, but from weakness within. The fall of Rome was not merely the end of a civilization. It marked the beginning of a dark age that lasted for centuries. It left a vast power vacuum in Europe and reshaped the political, religious, and cultural landscape. History tried to paint Rome as eternal, but like all empires, it was not immune to time. In the end, the greatest enemy wasn't just at the gates, it was at the heart.
Columbus didn't really discover what they told you.
On a cloudy morning in 1492, Christopher Columbus set sail across the Atlantic, driven by a dream to reach India by heading west. Aboard his ship, the Santa Maria, tension and anticipation filled the air. But what he didn't know was that the winds of fate were steering him toward a world unseen, one that would reshape history forever. Columbus was not the first to reach America. The Vikings came centuries before and perhaps even unknown peoples. But his voyage marked the moment that sparked a global transformation. When he set foot on the shores of the Caribbean, he had no idea he had stumbled upon an entire continent, one that would soon become the center of power struggles and the launch pad for the greatest colonial wave in history.
The Taino tribes welcomed Columbus with incense and gold, peaceful people who knew nothing of war or greed. But to Columbus and the empires behind him, the land and its people were resources to exploit, not cultures to respect. Thus began the countdown to the extinction of entire civilizations, crushed under the weight of disease, swords, and fire. The story of discovery was not only about sailors and adventure. It was about the ambitions of kings and an economy desperate for gold, spices, and slaves. Europe was on the brink of economic famine, and the new colonies opened lifelines of trade, paid for in blood and tears.
Ironically, Columbus died poor, never realizing the magnitude of the change he had set in motion. Today, his name is surrounded by controversy. Was he a hero who discovered a new world, or a conqueror who destroyed old ones? Either way, October 12th, 1492, changed the course of history forever. In Paris, 1789, the streets were boiling with fury, while the royal palaces overflowed with decadence. France, the empire once synonymous with art and elegance, stood on the brink of collapse. The people were starving, the king was aloof, and the old regime was about to crumble. King Louis XVI, born into a throne of gold, failed to grasp that to the hungry, a loaf of bread was more precious than any crown. While Queen Marie Antoinette reveled in luxury and lavish parties, women in the markets fought tooth and nail for scraps of food. The spark ignited when the people stormed the Bastille. The attack wasn't merely on a fortress, but on a symbol of oppression. The Bastille represented tyranny, and its fall marked the birth of a new era, one drenched in both hope and blood. The revolution began with ideals of liberty and equality, but the streets quickly transformed into a theater of terror. The guillotine spared no one. Royals, nobles, and even revolutionaries themselves fell beneath its blade. Maximilien Robespierre, one of the revolution's own architects, was executed by the very machine he wielded. Yet the revolution wasn't in vain. It redefined the nature of government, shattered the belief in divine right, and planted the seeds of modern democracy. From the ashes of chaos rose a republic, built on concepts like citizenship, the separation of powers, and human rights.
Today, the French Revolution is studied as one of history's greatest turning points. It wasn't just a rebellion against a corrupt regime. It was a revolt against the very concept of injustice. And while its cost was soaked in blood, the legacy it left behind reshaped Europe and the world forever. On a holy night during the month of Ramadan, when believers prepared for prayer and reflection, a chilling darkness fell over Baghdad. Not a blackout, but a deliberate, calculated act of terror. The Night of Power in 1988 would be remembered not for divine mercy, but for a massacre. Modern, engaging, smart, with a slight touch of mystery. In the final years of Saddam Hussein's rule, paranoia ran rampant. The threat wasn't only external, it was internal. Whispers of dissent, alleged plots, and imagined betrayals led to a brutal decision, a purge within the regime's own ranks. Dozens of high-ranking Ba'ath Party officers and security officials were arrested under suspicion of treason or espionage, often without a shred of evidence. The timing was no coincidence. The night of Laylat al-Qadr, a sacred most to harm and fucking know. The dungeons of the Iraqi intelligence headquarters, detainees were tortured until they confessed, then executed in mass. No trials, no defense, just a quick death in silence. The exact number of victims remains unknown. Some sources suggest 80, others claim over 100. But the horror lay not just in the numbers, but in the identities. Many of those executed were longtime loyalists, trusted allies, comrades in arms. Years of loyalty erased by a single signature. Even more haunting was the secrecy. The massacre was never officially acknowledged. It lived on only in whispers, survivor testimonies, and leaked documents years after Saddam's fall. There were no announcements, no funerals, no justice. The Night of Power massacre wasn't merely a political operation, it was a warning. A single night, but its terror echoed for years. In one sweep, the regime reminded everyone that loyalty alone wasn't protection, that fear was the only true currency of survival. The precise cause of the library's destruction remains one of history's enduring mysteries.
Was it Julius Caesar in 48 BC when his fire ships accidentally spread flames to the library during his siege of Alexandria? Was it later, under Emperor Aurelian during his campaign against Queen Zenobia? Or did its demise unfold gradually through religious shifts during Christian or early Islamic periods when certain knowledge was deemed heretical or unnecessary?
But greatness rarely guarantees survival. The precise cause of the library's destruction remains one of history's enduring mysteries. Was it Julius Caesar in 48 BC when his fire ships accidentally spread flames to the library during his siege of Alexandria? Was it later under Emperor Aurelian during his campaign against Queen Zenobia? Or did its demise unfold gradually through religious shifts during Christian or early Islamic periods when certain knowledge was deemed heretical or unnecessary?
Whatever the truth, the result was a tragedy beyond measure, the annihilation of centuries of accumulated wisdom. Thousands of irreplaceable manuscripts, some perhaps containing discoveries that could have revolutionized science, were lost forever. It's not far-fetched to imagine that humanity could have advanced by centuries had those works survived.
What makes the story even more haunting is the ambiguity. No definitive record exists of what truly happened. Did the library burn in one great inferno, or was it chipped away piece by piece over generations? Was it truly as vast and magnificent as described, or is it now wrapped in myth? Regardless, the burning of the Library of Alexandria has become more than an event. It's a symbol of how fragile knowledge can be, how easily truth can be erased. It represents a moment where ignorance triumphed over enlightenment, where the fire didn't just consume scrolls, but silenced voices, halted ideas, and altered the path of human progress. And yet, even in its absence, the legend of the library endures, reminding us what we must protect and what we stand to lose if we don't.
On a chilly morning in March 44 BC, Julius Caesar walked into the Roman Senate, confident and unshaken. He was at the height of his power, a military genius, a shrewd politician, and the man who had reshaped the Roman world. The crowds adored him, his legions obeyed him without question, and his rivals had either fallen or bent the knee. But within the marble walls of the Senate, a conspiracy brewed in whispers and shadows.
A group of senators, many of them once trusted allies and friends, believed Caesar posed a threat to the Republic. They feared he aspired to become king, to extinguish the fading flame of Roman democracy. Their solution? Eliminate him before it was
Brutus,
too late.
my friend,
In the heart of the Senate
what
chamber,
news do you
one
bring to Caesar
conspirator
today that
approached under the
requires such a
guise of
solemn
conversation,
approach?
then suddenly plunged a dagger into Caesar's body. Another followed, then another. Soon, over 20 men surrounded him, their blades tearing through flesh, driven not only by fear, but by a desperate hope of restoring the old order. It's said he received 23 stab wounds, but the final blow wasn't physical, it was emotional. As Caesar turned and saw the face of Brutus, his close friend, he uttered the immortal words, "Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus?" That moment shattered more than a man. It shattered the illusion of unity in Rome. The conspirators had hoped to save the Republic, but instead unleashed chaos. Riots broke out, Caesar's supporters demanded revenge, and civil war erupted. Rome descended into bloodshed, and the aftermath, the Republic they sought to protect, was no more. In its place rose Octavian, later Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The Roman Republic died with Caesar, and the Roman Empire
was born.
The assassination of Julius Caesar wasn't just a political act, it was a seismic shift in history. A dark lesson that the fear of tyranny can sometimes usher in a deeper, more lasting tyranny. And that betrayal, though swift and brutal, doesn't always stop power. It may simply transform it.
On a sweltering summer morning in 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, arrived in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia. It was supposed to be a diplomatic visit, a sign of imperial strength and stability. But in truth, the empire was a powder keg, and Sarajevo would become the place where the spark was struck. The assassination of the Archduke was not an isolated act of madness. It was the product of years of simmering tensions, nationalism, military alliances, ethnic unrests, and a terrifying arms race. All it needed was a trigger.
On June 28, 1914, as the Archduke's open-top car passed through the streets, a 19-year-old Serbian nationalist named Gavrila Princip stepped forward and fired 2 shots. One bullet pierced Franz Ferdinand's neck. The other struck his wife Sophie in the abdomen. Within minutes, both were dead. The world changed in that moment. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and declared war. Russia came to Serbia's defense. Germany declared war on Russia. France and Britain followed, and soon nations from all over the world were drawn into a global inferno.
World War I had begun, not with legions marching in glory, but with confusion, fear, and trench warfare that swallowed millions. Across the Western Front, soldiers lived and died in mud-filled trenches surrounded by barbed wire, rats, and the constant fear of gas attacks. In Eastern Europe, entire cities were flattened. The Middle East became a chessboard of collapsing empires and foreign ambitions.
This was the first war to use tanks, airplanes, and poison gas. It was industrialized slaughter on a scale the world had never seen. And when the dust finally settled in 1918, the map of Europe had been redrawn in blood. 4 empires, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, German, and Russian, vanished. But peace did not come. Instead, the war sowed the seeds of resentment and extremism. Within 2 decades, a failed Austrian artist named Adolf Hitler would rise, fueled by the chaos left behind. World War I didn't start with a bang. It started with a bullet that struck not just a man and his wife, but the very heart of a fragile continent. In the shattered streets of post-World War I Germany, defeat wasn't just written in the rubble. It was etched into the soul of a broken nation. The fledgling Weimar Republic stumbled through political chaos and economic catastrophe. Inflation ran so rampant that German marks were worth less than toilet paper. Amid this hopelessness, people craved a savior. And then came a man with a strange mustache, fiery eyes, and a voice that stirred the masses. His name? Adolf Hitler. Born in Austria in 1889, Hitler grew up immersed in nationalism, racism, and a burning sense of injustice. He saw the Treaty of Versailles, which placed the full blame of the war on Germany, not as peace, but as humiliation. In 1919, he joined a small fringe group, the German Workers' Party. It was insignificant until Hitler stepped in. With mesmerizing speeches, propaganda mastery, and theatrical charisma, he turned the party into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party. In 1923, he tried to seize power in the beer hall putsch in Munich, but failed and was imprisoned. There he wrote Mein Kampf, a dangerous manifesto that mixed autobiography with ideology. virulent anti-Semitism, belief in Aryan supremacy, hatred for democracy, and a vision of German expansion through war.
When the Great Depression struck in 1929, it devastated Germany. Millions were jobless, starving, angry. Democracy seemed weak. Extremism thrived. By 1933, Hitler was legally appointed chancellor, but he had no intention of sharing power. Within months, the Reichstag burned, civil liberties were suspended, opposition was crushed. The Nazi flag flew over every institution. He became the Führer, a totalitarian ruler who used fear, myth, and propaganda to control every facet of German life. Hitler's rise wasn't just a political triumph, it was a psychological conquest. He gave Germans someone to blame, the Jews, the communists, and something to believe in, restored national pride. His rallies were orchestrated spectacles. His promises echoed in every newspaper, classroom, and film reel. The entire country was swept into a cult of personality. But beneath the surface lay darkness. Hitler's path to power was paved with despair, fueled by hatred, and guided by ruthless ambition. It transformed a defeated, struggling Germany into a fascist war machine and dragged the world into its deadliest conflict. His rise was a warning, a reminder that democracies can fall, not just to violence, but to apathy, fear, and a voice that says, "I alone can fix it."
On the morning of August 6, 1945, the city of Hiroshima stirred to life like any other day. Children walked to school, shopkeepers unlocked their doors, and citizens tried to carry on despite the war that had ravaged Asia for years. But no one knew that within minutes, history would change forever, splitting time into two before and after. At exactly 8:15 a.m., a lone plane cut through the sky. It wasn't an ordinary air raid. It was the beginning of a new era of destruction. From the American B-29 bomber Enola Gay, the first atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy, was dropped. It detonated 600 meters above the heart of Hiroshima. In an instant, the city became a furnace. A fireball hotter than 4,000 degrees Celsius incinerated everything, steel, stone, and skin alike. Tens of thousands of people vanished in a flash. Others burned alive, buried under rubble, or consumed by invisible radiation. The bomb didn't just destroy with its blast, it introduced a new kind of suffering, radiation sickness. People walked like ghosts, their skin hanging from their bodies. Doctors had no words for what they were seeing: bleeding gums, falling hair, sudden deaths. The survivors, Hibakusha, carried scars, physical and emotional, for generations. The U.S. claimed the bomb was necessary to end the war quickly and avoid a costly invasion of Japan. But the truth was more complicated. It was also a message, a chilling demonstration of America's new godlike power, especially aimed at the Soviet Union. Hiroshima wasn't just a military decision, it was a moral earthquake. For the first time in history, a weapon had the power to erase a city in seconds. The world realized science had opened Pandora's box, and no one could close it again. In the years that followed, Hiroshima struggled to heal, but it rose. From ashes and radiation, it rebuilt, not just buildings, but a purpose. Today, Hiroshima stands as a beacon of peace, reminding humanity of its darkest moment and its responsibility to never repeat it. Yet the shadow of the mushroom cloud still lingers, whispering to history, absolute power, no matter how justified, is always a danger to human existence.
On a cold December night in 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev sat in his Kremlin office, penning the final words of his presidency, words that would echo across the globe. With calm and measured tones, he declared the end of the Soviet Union, not just as a state, but as a dream, an ideology, and a force that had shaped global history for nearly 7 decades. But the fall didn't begin that night. It had been unraveling for years, like an iceberg silently melting beneath the surface. The signs were everywhere: a crumbling economy, endless breadlines, political repression, and a costly arms race. Then came Gorbachev's reforms: perestroika, restructuring, and glasnost, openness, his last attempt to revive the system, but instead they unleashed forces that couldn't be controlled. The Soviet republics began to rise. From the Baltic states to Central Asia, nations long held under the hammer and sickle started demanding independence. In Lithuania, protesters were shot. In Azerbaijan, ethnic violence flared. The cracks were no longer hidden, they were everywhere. Then came the August coup of 1991. Hardline communists attempted to seize power, placing Gorbachev under house arrest. But the people, led by Boris Yeltsin, flooded the streets. They climbed tanks, raised Russian flags, and refused to be silenced. The empire had lost its grip. It no longer ruled through fear. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned, and the Soviet flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the final time. The great communist titan that had once terrified the West fell without a shot fired.
But a lingering question remains. Did the Soviet Union truly die? Or did it simply evolve into a more aggressive, more isolated Russia, still chasing the ghost of past glory? In an era of rising authoritarianism and global instability, the Soviet shadow still looms over international politics. The fall of the USSR wasn't just the collapse of a superpower, it was the end of an era. An ideology dissolved, a century of Cold War tension snapped in silence, yet the aftershocks still ripple through our world today.